Welcome to Lush Life, No Labels. I'm Michelle. Fun fact, this isn't my first podcast. This is actually the second podcast that I've started. The first one I started a few years ago with a friend of mine, and we actually started it super randomly. She and I realized we would have random conversations, and for whatever reason, we thought, you know what, let's just record this and maybe somebody will find it funny. We only had a few episodes, and I remember one episode was about where do fig seeds or fig trees come from? And then we went on this whole deep dive about where they came from and how they're actually connected to bees because she went to a dinner party where there was figs and jam, and that just kind of sparked it. But it was a short-lived podcast, but I did like doing it. And now I'm doing this podcast, Lush Life. And as you guys know, I'm trying to be more consistent with recording and posting this podcast, which isn't always easy. But one thing that I've learned between my first and second podcast is that this is an avenue that I do enjoy doing, and I'm willing to put in the work to continue it because it is one of my hobbies. And that actually brings me to the story of the week this week around my hobby of my podcast. And I actually connected with some other people this week who are also trying to stay consistent with not just podcasts, but just other hobbies that they do. And it was nice being around people like that and really trying to understand what do people like to do outside of their main job and why do they like to do it. So let's dive in today. I personally like this topic because the world is so fast paced. And in the US, particularly, there is a hustle culture where sometimes I feel that we feel the pressure to always be doing more. This can come in two ways. One, through a side hustle where the goal is to make money, and two, through a hobby that you do solely for the fun of it. Now, you don't always need to be doing these things, but it's good to recognize that there are more things out there than just our main job. So, how do you define a side hustle versus a hobby? I define a side hustle as an activity outside of your main source of income where the goal is to make money, whereas a hobby is a leisure activity for relaxation, creativity, or personal enjoyment. But there can, of course, be overlaps between these two things, which I'll talk about later in this episode. Let's actually dive into the first one here, side hustles. Like I said, in the US, there is a hustle culture where people say, oh, you should do this. Oh, you should be doing more. Oh, you should do XYZ. You're not doing enough. And again, that can create pressure, but I do get that there are a lot of different side hustles that exist out there. For example, I've had side hustles before. One side hustle that I had for years was tutoring. I tutored in college and actually post college once I started working full time. So it was kind of my part-time second job alongside that other one. I even did it when I was in grad school. So I actually have tutored for over, I'd say 6, 7 years now. And that was a side hustle that paid me. I have a friend who is a good cook and started a catering business. So there are definitely different things that we can all do and consider it a side hustle. Since these are outside of our main sources of income, we might do them on the weekends or after work. And when I've had side hustles, I did see a few benefits. Of course, the first thing is financial. It gives you more money and it gives you more flexibility to make money in other ways. It also helped me to develop a bit of entrepreneurial skills because I practiced running a small business essentially, learning how to market myself to potential customers, managing my time. And then the other thing that was beneficial for me is that it can be fulfilling outside of a traditional job. Typically, when it's a side hustle, it's something that you are choosing to do and that you don't have to do, technically. So, when you don't have to do it, I think you can find fulfillment in it and be more creative about what you're doing, what skills you're applying, and how you can make that extra money. On the other end are hobbies. And there are actually a few different types of hobbies that I've noticed people have. One type of hobby is where you create something. This can be along the lines of knitting, painting, playing an instrument, collecting trading cards, even things like this podcast, where I'm creating what I'm saying, creating, editing, posting, all of those things involved. Another type of hobby is where you consume something that someone else has made. That could be listening to music, reading a book, going to watch plays. The third type of hobby that I've seen at least is active. It can be hiking, doing outdoor sports like soccer or tennis. And then finally, a hobby that you can monetize, which is the one that's directly related to side hustles and one where you're actually making money, but still doing something that you're enjoying outside of your main job. Some benefits I've seen with hobbies, and I think I've tried a lot of different types of hobbies actually. Some I've continued with till now, some where I felt like, you know what, I actually don't enjoy this. So some of the benefits that I've seen in my hobbies are stress relief and having a better mental health. So just something that helps me to go somewhere else or helps me to distract myself, I think is a good hobby. Another one is creativity. As I mentioned, it could be one where you are creating something, but it allows you to build new skills and find new ways to express yourself. Hobbies can also help build confidence and give you a sense of accomplishment. One of the hobbies that I actually do in the wintertime is building different Lego sets, specifically Lego flowers. When I finish one of these sets, I feel so accomplished because there are often over 800, 900 pieces that I have to put together, which takes me hours, days, months. And when I finish it, I feel like I actually accomplished something, which I think is pretty cool. I'm not doing it for anyone but myself. It helps me feel better and it helps me build the confidence that I can actually pay attention to how to build these Lego sets. The last one here is specific to hobbies where you're doing it with other people. So if you're doing a sport or going to painting class, this can help expand your social circle because you're actively participating in the hobby with other people. And whether you have to work on a team or you have to put your heads together to complete your mission in that hobby, it's a nice way to get connected with people who are like-minded and get connected with people who enjoy doing similar things that you enjoy doing. I mentioned the hustle culture in the US before and how that can create pressure. And not to say that the hustle culture always creates pressure. I do think on one hand, it can actually also help us to expand our horizons. So I want to talk a little bit about how you can enter into the hustle culture if you want to by turning your hobby into a side hustle. I do want to caveat that it's good to be careful here because I've seen situations where people try to monetize their hobbies, which is very possible, but it's important to maintain a balance between your passion and the profit that you seek. Because once you start looking for money, that becomes the main goal of that activity or that hobby that you're doing. For example, in the past, I've tried to monetize one of my social media pages on TikTok, actually. I initially started the page for fun, posting Pilates videos, movie reviews, meals that I cooked, just things that I had enjoyed and wanted to share with other people. I was getting a little bit of following, but it was pretty small. And then I started posting about being a pedestrian. Those of you who know me know I feel very strongly about being a pedestrian and taking public transit and walking around. So I start posting about those things, some of the things that frustrate me, what I noticed about it. And I also start talking about corporate greed, which I have a lot to say about too. And those two topics specifically got me a lot more likes and a lot more followers every time I posted. So I started thinking, oh, let me just keep posting about these topics so that I can keep growing my page and maybe eventually I can gain enough followers or likes to start getting paid by the platform. But what I found was that I didn't want to do that all the time. I enjoyed having a variety of topics that I posted about And I felt kind of trapped because I felt like, oh, if I post about things that like cooking or Pilates, then people aren't really going to pay attention to it, and that's not going to help me get paid. So I kind of lost track of why I started to post in the first place. And I felt sort of like everyone else was determining what I wanted to do, but I ultimately wanted to be the one to determine what I do because it takes time and effort to do all of those things. I wanted to feel like I was spending time on things that I actually enjoyed. So that was a fail. I kind of stopped doing that. I initially started doing it as a stress reliever, but trying to monetize it put pressure on me to have to post every day, to try to find topics to talk about. And that just became exhausting for me. And shifting my mindset to figure out why I wanted to do the hobby was helpful because I realized that I actually just wanted to separate it. That wasn't one of the areas where I want to feel pressure doing it. I just wanted to be much more casual. And while it didn't work out for me when I tried to monetize one of my hobbies, I do have a friend who successfully did this. I mentioned before, cooking, right? So I have a friend who is really good at cooking. They would cook for their friends all the time, they'd cook for their family. It was great. Everybody would say, "Oh, you're such a good cook, man. You're such a good cook." And then one day he actually decided to start a catering business as a side hustle with another friend of his, where they would get customers, they'd buy their food, they would cook, they would deliver it to their customer, and then get paid for that. And of course, there were challenges initially getting some customers, figuring out the cost of food, the time to cook, the mode of delivery, but it ended up working out for him and he's still doing this. And I think it's awesome because he enjoyed the cooking, which is great, and he still does it, but now he can actually make money off of it and still enjoy the cooking in some aspects outside of doing something for a business. And I think that's a great example of someone who was able to turn a hobby, something casual, into a side hustle where he's making money for himself with something that he knows how to do really well. So it's definitely possible. And I'm sure my listeners have seen examples of people who've done this successfully, or you've done it successfully yourself. That's one avenue you can take with your hobby. On the flip side, I also know people who have a side hustle that they decide to turn into a hobby for one reason or another. I'll give an example for me. I mentioned to you before that I had a side hustle for tutoring where I taught English as a second language. And I also did resume, essay editing, and interview prep. I'd say I'm pretty good at that. And I used to get paid for it for years. And one day I just wanted to take a break from those obligations, but I still had a passion for tutoring. So I was like, okay, let me just start volunteering because at least then I can continue to use these skills. But the reason I wanted to turn it into a hobby was because I felt obligated to keep doing classes when I was being paid for it. And then things changed and I just didn't have as much time. So I started volunteering, which was fun. It was less pressure because I wasn't being paid. I was still putting in the effort though to make sure that I was teaching people correctly, but it kind of soured a little bit with the volunteering because then it became more like work than I wanted for that situation. So I kind of found myself right back where I started and it became less fun. And this is partially on me. I was putting in too much time volunteering, almost the same amount of time as I was when I was getting paid for it. And I think that's when it started becoming like a side hustle again. But then I was like, well, I'm not being paid for this. I'm putting in way too much time preparing for these classes, teaching, all of these things. And so I decided to go back again and just turn it into a side hustle. And I've come to terms with the fact that that type of thing I enjoy doing most as a side hustle. If I do volunteer to help people, I still help friends revise their resumes and help them with interview prep, but that's usually just a conversation or two. It's not something that I have to do weekly. So I'm glad that I actually realized that about this particular activity that I do, because I do have other hobbies that I enjoy doing that have nothing to do with that. So I think it's definitely possible to turn your side hustle into a hobby and vice versa. The main thing I'd say here is just not to put too much pressure on yourself, especially if it's a hobby, because it's not meant to be that way. And I mentioned this before, but side hustles and hobbies are technically optional. As adults, we have to maintain remain a main source of income to pay bills, buy groceries, have car insurance, health insurance, etc. But these are activities that we choose to do on top of that. Maybe you need a side hustle because your main job doesn't pay you enough, or you see it as a way to become financially independent outside of a corporation. For a hobby, you may see it as a way to break up your day and have some fun or just meet new people. In the end, though, both of them are choices, but they can help us improve. One way that I've improved is having more adaptability and time management, because whether it's a hobby or a side hustle, you have to fit it into the rest of your schedule. That's just the reality of the situation. So it really does challenge you to figure out, when can I fit this in? What type of time or when can I dedicate this to? Side hustles and hobbies also help to build discipline, because it helps you establish a routine and it helps you focus on different things, especially if these are wildly different from each other. I also like having hobbies and side hustles because it takes me on a trip of personal discovery and passion. You can find out what you like to do, how you like to spend your time, and what new skills you might want to build. It's not always easy finding a new hobby or a side hustle, and where you find these can vary. But here are some tips for you in case you're looking. I would think about an area of growth or a new skill you're interested in developing or expanding. Do you want money for it, or do you want to just do it for fun? Maybe you don't know yet, and that's okay. So you could always start as a hobby, just start doing that thing and then see if maybe you want to monetize. You never know. Sometimes you're doing something and then someone wants to pay you for it, and you never imagined that they'd want to pay you for it. That's actually kind of what happened with my friend who started his catering business, is that he had a friend who had an event, but knew that it would be unfair to just ask him to make all this food for like 30 people. So the friend offered to pay him for the time and the work of making the food for this party. And that is when it clicked for my friend to start a catering business. So sometimes we just do it and then you never know what's going to happen to it. So it's good to be open about that. If you don't know whether or not you want to be paid for it, just jump into it and then you can go from there and build from there. It also gives you a chance to gain a new following if that's what you're looking for, especially on the social media side. No matter what you are looking for, I believe it's important to have one or both of these types of activities. Like I said, I think it helps to break up your schedule, especially in the crazy world that we live in today. And it helps with self-growth and fulfillment as well. So I'll leave you with this. Are you looking for an activity to do outside of work? If so, what is the first step you might want to take to start on this activity? Leave me a comment on some of your hobbies and side hustles. Follow my podcast on Spotify and Apple for new episodes every Thursday. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.